He's a good guy. I think he changed as the years went by. This is what he said in 1948, and I think it obtains today, and I've seen very bizarre manifestations of this, of what we Americans feel that we're entitled to. I was giving a talk in Pewaukee, Wisconsin. Anybody know where Pewaukee is? Well, it's a very ritzy suburb of
Milwaukee.
Milwaukee. Thanks. Pewaukee, Milwaukee. I should be able to remember that, right? And after my talk, a young man, very well dressed, came up. And there was a group of little 30 around there asking me further questions. And he insisted on going first. He said, Mr. McGovern, I don't understand. What is your problem? I mean, tell me what your problem is. You don't dispute that we need the oil, do you? I said, no, of course. Half of my talk dealt with our need for oil. He said, well, then you have to admit that 5, 6, 7 GIs killed a week is a very small price to pay for the oil we need. I mean, in Vietnam, you had hundreds killed every week. So what's your problem? And I said to myself, wow. I had long suspected that subconsciously, under the core of many Americans, was this thought, you know, we need the oil, we need our way of life. 5 or 6 kids from the inner city or the farms, small price to pay. But this guy articulated it. And I was set back and I didn't know what to say, so I thought, well, maybe the utilitarian argument would work with this fellow. So I said, well, there are 1.3 billion Muslims in the world. They're mighty ticked off at us. And there are porous borders all around Iraq, and they're just not going to do it. They're just not going to let us do it. We're not going to get away with it. And of course, he dismissed that. He said, well, we're the sole remaining superpower in the world. We can do what we want. So then I said, well, suppose one of those men killed last week was your son. The thought had never occurred to him. The thought had never crossed his mind. And he said instinctively, well, it wouldn't be my son. And that, my friends, is a big, big part of the problem. It wouldn't be his sons. And then I got kind of angry, and I said, well, are you one of those folks that would like to have the 10 Commandments in the schoolhouses and the courthouses of this world? And he said, oh yeah, it's a good idea. I said, well, I'm a little rusty, but I think there's one that says, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. One that says, thou shalt not steal. Another talks about not killing. Another about not lying about what you're doing. And there's even one that says, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. As if God was blessing what we're doing there, simply by saying, God bless America. And so what I'm saying here, folks, is that I think there's a very pernicious sort of subconscious thing at work in many of our fellow Americans, where this appeal to our way of life, this ridiculous assertion that the terrorists do these things because they hate our way of life, or they hate our freedom, or they hate our democracy, that appeals to a lot of people. Because later, in Cincinnati, I was on one of these Christian radio stations, and the fellow blurted out into the microphone, well, if we need the oil and we need to attack Iraq, I'm for it. I'm for getting the oil that we need. And so I think we have to address that. And when we deal with that, and people say, well, aren't you against terrorists? What do you, would you rather have Saddam Hussein in power? that one really gets me. The best way to talk to that, I'd recommend this to you. A fellow goes out into his garage in the morning, okay, his wife and his kids are there, but the 2 kids are right in front of the car. And he sees this black spider going up the side of his garage. And so he gets right in the car, gins up the motor, and goes full speed ahead, kills the kids, kills the spider. The wife comes out, Carl, what are you doing? What are you doing? And Carl says, so I infer from your remarks that you would rather have me spare that black spider who might have come into our house and done havoc on our children. And it's the same sort of thing about Saddam Hussein. So how do we defeat terrorism? The best answer I got on that was from Tony Campala, who was not unknown in these parts. He came down and talked at our school, and he had a very simple solution. He said, defeat terrorism the same way you defeat malaria. Now, as is well known, with malaria, you find the mosquitoes and you trace them back to the swamp, right? And then you set up sharpshooters all around the swamp, and you shoot all the mosquitoes as they try to get out of the swamp. So it is with terrorists. You go back and you find out what the swamp of their grievances are, okay? And when you see that there, then you don't set up sharpshooters around the swamp and try to kill all the terrorists. You address the grievances, and they're very legitimate grievances, and part of them are our fault, part of them are one-sided support for the kinds of actions that the State of Israel, a faction of that government, a faction of those people have done, and that they identify the American government with, and cannot escape it since we provide the weaponry and the economic aid and everything else. So what we need to do is address those things. And when people take sort of simplistic answers to these things, and when we look at what's happened in terms of not only what's happened to my profession, okay? Now, I don't ask you to feel sorry for me, but I ask you to understand how it feels to spend 27 years in an ethos where you seek the truth and you tell it without fear or favor, and you see that corrupted. And then you see it corrupted for the express purpose of deceiving our elected representatives in the Congress into approving an unnecessary war. I mean, in the first instance, it's kind of an outrageous thing for us to suffer. But in the second instance, we're a pretty conservative bunch, we intelligence analysts and army officers. We swore an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And we see somebody set out deliberately to eviscerate the powers and the responsibilities of one branch of government to achieve an aim such as unnecessary war. Well, there is no outrage doesn't do it to explain our reaction to that. Now, I was feeling so angry after we were unable to stop this war. So I had these megalomaniac ideas that if we told the president the truth and warned him as we did, let me just tell you that we ended up our very first memorandum we set it up just like we did when we were working in government. Memorandum for the president, from, in this case, VIPS, subject, Colin Powell's speech at the UN today. The same day treatment, we got it out on the AFP wire. First sentence, we give Colin Powell an A for performance and a C- for content. Now, if we knew then what we know now, of course, we would have flunked him outright. We warned the president that your intelligence analysts are being subjected to incredible pressure, first and foremost by your vice president, who has visited CIA headquarters 12 times in recent months. Now, people ask me, is that unusual? I say, no, it's not unusual. That's unprecedented. I worked there for 27 years. I used to brief the vice president, George Herbert Walker Bush. I always went down to him. If he needed more expertise than I had, I would drag as many people as he wanted. That's the way we did business. And for the head of the CIA to allow his young analysts to be subjected to that kind of pressure from the Vice President of the United States is and remains unconscionable. Anyhow, watching all this, I found myself really angry, And where I grew up in the Bronx, he was allowed to be angry for a day, 2 days it was really bad. If you were Irish, they give you a week, But I was angry all the time. Luckily, I remembered something that I learned in college at Fordham. There we had to study a lot of Thomas Aquinas.